In Homestead, Florida, stands one of this generation's megalithic structures, built by a single man named Ed Leedskalnin. First in Florida City, he relocated the entire castle to Homestead, Florida, where he completed the work. Frequently compared to the pyramids at Giza, the heads of Easter Island, and Stonehenge, we look at Coral Castle. One giant question remains. How did he build this? The only first-hand accounts that we have of other people watching Ed work is only at night, where he has been said to sing to the stones that now make up what he called Rock Gate. Many of these single pieces of rock weigh over 1,000 tons, and the question remains, how did he do this? We explore this question among many other questions about the nature of our reality, hidden technology, mathematics, and the world energy grid. Come along with me on this journey as we look into just how Ed Leedskalnin created Coral Castle. Welcome everyone to Yissel Missile Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissel. Today we are covering the Philadelphia experiment in our Coral Castle Deep Dive series. I had the microphone muted earlier. I apologize on that. But we have this book that we have continued to read upon. We are burning through it. We are collecting the information, and we're trying to digest it, review it. But the Philadelphia experiment is something I've been wanting to cover on this channel for quite a long time. I wasn't too sure how to go about it, but thankfully these series have helped get everything going. So I appreciate all you being here. Let's get this this slideshow going. I hope that all of the photographs are still uncorrupted here. I saw there was a green photograph in one of these for the slideshow. But anyways, we're gonna get started here. Please remember to drop a like, comment below your thoughts. If you have anything to share in this conversation, please do. If you're watching this after the fact, please share your thoughts. That's all I ask. We are running independently here. There's no corporations, no sponsorships. We're not pushing any products here. This is purely informational, especially for this show. So, buckle in. The Philadelphia Experiment by Harry Osoff. So let's look at this photograph here. Looks like we got Einstein, which very glorified beyond his abilities, I believe, but we'll see as we go here. Albert Einstein conferring with naval officers in his study at Princeton, New Jersey, July 24th, 1943, and this is from the National Archives. So what does this have to do with Coral Castle? Well, if you have no clue whatsoever, you're going to find out today. Alright, so we start with, what page are we on here? We're on page 111, if you are choosing to read along here. So again, this is a compilation of works, and today we're covering Philadelphia Experiment in this portion of the book. And we're going through it from cover to cover. So, no extra fluff here. There's a lot of different articles in this chapter. We'll see. I want to get through this entire thing tonight, so we'll see how that goes. Regional Philadelphia newspaper article, October 1943. Strange circumstances surround tavern brawl. Several city police officers responding to a call to aid members of the Navy Shore Patrol in breaking up a tavern brawl near the U.S. Navy docks here last night got something of a surprise when they arrived on the scene to find the place empty of customers. According to a pair of very nervous waitresses, the Shore Patrol had arrived first and cleared the place out, but not before two of the sailors involved allegedly did a disappearing act. Quote, "They just sort of vanished into thin air. ... Right there." End quote. Reported one of the frightened hostesses. Quote, "And I ain't been drinking either." End quote. At that point, according to her account, the Shore Patrol proceeded to hustle everyone out of the place in short order. A subsequent chat with the local police precinct left no doubts as to the fact that some sort of general brawl had indeed occurred in the vicinity of the dockyards at about 11 o'clock last night, but neither confirmation nor denial of the stranger aspects of the story could be immediately obtained. One reported witness succinctly summed up the affair by dismissing it as nothing more than, quote, "a lot of hooey from them daffy dames down there," end quote. Who, he went on to say, were just looking for some free publicity. Damage to the tavern was estimated to be in the vicinity of $600. And again, this is in October of 1943, so I'm not sure how inflation plays into all this. The Philadelphia Experiment is the name that has been commonly given to an alleged top-secret experiment conducted by the United States Navy in 1943, in which the destroyer escort USS Eldridge, it's spelled Eldridge, outfitted with several tons of specialized electronics equipment capable of creating a tremendous pulsating magnetic field around itself, was first made invisible and then transported in a matter of moments from the Philadelphia Navy Yard to the Norfolk docks and back again, a total distance of over 400 miles or 640 kilometers. The United States government for the last 43 years has officially denied that this experiment ever took place. Challenging this statement, however, are several unanswered questions. What caused the death of some of the crew members aboard ship in a safe and secure harbor? Why was the remainder of the crew discharged as medically unfit? If one concludes that the Philadelphia experiment did really occur, then was the untimely death of an independent researcher investigating the alleged experiment really suicide? How could the Navy possibly accomplish such a fantastic experiment? In any case, the story begins with Morris Ketchum Jessup, an astronomy and mathematics professor at the University of Michigan. Morris Ketchum Jessup was born in Rockville, Indiana, March 20th, 1900, and named after his uncle, a railroad and financial baron, in parentheses, who also had a cape in the northernmost tip of Greenland named after him. End parentheses. In the late 1920s, while a doctorate student at the University of Michigan, the young Jessup's research was responsible for the discovery of many physical double stars now catalogued by the Royal Astronomical Society of London. While the country was in the firm grip of the Depression and jobs were hard to find, Jessup, like so many other highly technical people, took work wherever he could. He was first assigned by the U.S. Department of Agriculture to go to the Amazon to study sources of crude rubber. From there, he became a photographer on an archaeological expedition to Mayan ruins in Central America. Then Jessup went to Peru to study pre-Incan culture. It was in Peru that Jessup, after studying these massive ruins with their incredible exactness and implicit construction skills, speculated that they could have been built only with the aid of levitating devices from skyships of some sort. This theory places Jessup among the first of modern scientists to believe in the ancient astronauts, quote-unquote, theory. This view naturally did not put him in high regard among his employers and colleagues, and he was soon on his own. Jessup continued his research at his own expense. He found some very interesting craters in Mexico that were similar in structure and type to the mysterious craters on the moon. Further research disclosed that the United States Air Force had highly classified photos of the Mexican craters. Running out of money, Jessup returned to the U.S. in 1954 to raise funds for further research. When the flying saucer craze ran rampant in the late 1940s and early 1950s, Jessup became interested, first casually, and then quite seriously. His major focus was possible propulsion power for these sky ships. And give me one moment. I gotta take a sip here. Hey Andreas, good to see you here in the chat. This is going to be an interesting one today. From what he had learned in Central America, Mexico, and Peru, Jessup was convinced that UFOs were a real possibility, and he had enough foundation to prove it. Jessup moved to Washington, D.C. and devoted the next year to extensive research. On January 13th, 1955, he gave his publisher the completed manuscript of his book, quote, "The Case for the UFO." And I'm going to make a note of that. The book sold well enough, such that in the fall of 1955, Bantam issued a paperback edition. Shortly after this book was published, Jessup received a most unusual letter. It was written in several different colors of ink, and the spelling and punctuation were most odd. The subject of the letter, however, was even stranger than its grammatical oddities. The correspondent, a Mr. Allende, in parentheses, who signed his letters, quote, Carl Allen, end quote, end parentheses, was markedly interested in Jessup's ideas about levitation, and went into great lengths to agree with Jessup's theory that many of our megaliths were built using the technique of levitation. In fact, he assured Jessup that levitation was not only scientifically possible, but was commonplace on Earth in our recent past. Jessup was so fascinated by the style of the letter and the agreement with his own theory that he wrote back to Allende asking for more details. These events concurred with several other pressing matters. At this time, Jessup was doing the publicity and lecture circuit and was also preparing his second book, The UFO and the Bible. He soon forgot about the mysterious letter. During the next year, Jessup pushed for research into the unified field theory, something Einstein had worked on during the last 20 years of his life. It was this consuming interest that brought the, quote, Philadelphia experiment, end quote, back into the limelight. On January 13th, 1956, 75 years ago, by the way, exactly 1 year after this first book was published, Morris Ketchum Jessup received the following letter. And in parentheses, as an editor's note, it is reprinted here exactly as Jessup received it. This letter contains many typographical errors and odd capitalizations of certain words. These have not been corrected as they contain a significant part of the key to the whole matter. However, a few new paragraphs have been made in the long text to aid readability. End parentheses. So I'm just going to read through this. And if I have to show something on camera, like on the camera here, I'll do that. But we're going to read this letter that he received. My dear Dr. Jessup, your invocation to the public that they move en masse upon their representatives and have thusly enough pressure placed at the right and sufficient number of places wherefrom a law demanding research into Dr. Albert Einstein's unified field theory may be enacted, in parentheses 1925 through 1927, end parentheses, is not at all necessary. It may interest you to know that the good doctor was not so much influenced in his retraction of that work by mathematics as he most assuredly was by humantics. His later computations, done strictly for his own edification and amusement upon cycles of human civilization and progress compared to the growth of man's general overall character, was enough to horrify him. Thus, we are told today that the theory was, quote, incomplete, end quote. Dr. B. Russell asserts privately that it is complete. He also says that man is not ready for it and shan't be until after World War III. Nevertheless, quote, results, end quote, of my friend Dr. Franklin Reno were used. Italics. Were used. These were a complete recheck of that theory, with a view to any and every possible quick use of it, if feasible, in a very short time. There were good results as far as a group math recheck and as far as a good physical, quote, result, end quote, to boot. And then in all caps, yet the Navy fears to use this result, end all caps. The result was and stands today as proof that the unified field theory, to a certain extent, is correct. Beyond that certain extent, no person in his right senses, or having any senses at all, will evermore dare to go. I am sorry that I misled you in my previous missive. True enough, such a form of levitation has been accomplished as described. It is also a very commonly observed reaction of certain metals to certain fields surrounding a current, this field being used for that purpose. Had Faraday concerned himself about the mag field surrounding an electric current, we today would not exist, or if we did exist, our present geopolitical situation would have the very time-bombish, ticking off towards destruction atmosphere that now exists. All right, with an exclamation point at the end. The, quote, result, end quote, was complete invisibility of a ship, destroyer type, and all of its crew, while at sea. And in parentheses, October 1943, end parentheses. So this letter's not over yet, but making some interesting claims here. The field was effective in an oblate spheroidal shape, extending 100 yards, more or less due to lunar position and altitude, out from each beam of the ship. Any person within that sphere became vague in form, but he too observed those persons aboard that ship as though they too were of the same state, yet were walking upon nothing. Any person without that sphere could see nothing save the clearly defined shape of the ship's hull in the water, providing, of course, that that person was just close enough to see, yet just barely outside of that field. Why tell you now? Very simple. If you choose to go mad, then you would reveal this information. Half of the officers and the crew of that ship are at present mad as hatters. A few are even yet confined to certain areas where they may receive trained scientific aid when they either, quote, go blank, end quote, or, quote, go blank, end quote, and get stuck, end quote. So that this is part of like the word for word transcription of everything. I'm trying to make it as legible as possible. Going bland, i.e. an after effect of the man having been within the field too much, is not at all an unpleasant experience to healthily curious sailors. However, it is when also they, quote, get stuck, end quote, that they call it, quote, hell incorporated, end quote. The man thusly stricken cannot move of his own volition unless one or more of those who are within the field go and touch him quickly, else he, quote, freezes, end quote. If a man freezes, his position must be marked out carefully, and then the field is cut off. Everyone but that, quote, frozen, end quote, man is able to move. To appreciate apparent solidity again. Then, the newest member of the crest, the word is just spelled CRES, must approach the spot, where he will find the, quote, frozen, end quote, man's face or bare skin that is not covered by usual uniform clothing. Sometimes it takes only an hour or so, sometimes all night and all day long, and worse, it once took 6 months to get the man, quote, unfrozen, end quote. This, quote, deep freeze, end quote, was not psychological. It is a result of a hyperfield that is set up within the field of the body, while the, quote, scorch, end quote, field is turned on, and this at length or upon an old hand. A highly complicated piece of equipment had to be constructed in order to unfreeze those who became, quote, true froze, end quote. And in parentheses is an editor's note. This could be, quote, free freeze, end quote, end parentheses. Or, quote, deep freeze, end quote, subjects. Usually, a deep freeze man goes mad, stark raving, gibbering, running mad, if his, quote, freeze, end quote, is far more than a day in our time. I speak of time, for deep, frozen men are not aware of time as we know it. They are like semi-comatose person who live, breathe, look, and feel, but still are unaware of so utterly many things as to constitute a, quote, netherworld, end quote, to them. A man in an ordinary common freeze is aware of time, sometimes acutely so. Yet they are never aware of time precisely as you and I are aware of it. The first deep freeze, as I said, took 6 months to rectify. It also took over $5 million worth of electronic equipment and a special ship berth, BERTH. If around or near the Philadelphia Navy Yard you see a group of sailors in the act of putting their hands upon a fellow or upon, quote, thin air, end quote, observe the digits and appendages of the stricken man. If they seem to waver as though within a heat mirage, and this is in all bold, go quickly and put your hands upon him, for that man is, again in bold, the very most desperate of men in the world. Not one of those men ever want at all to become again invisible. I do not think that much more need to be said as to why man is not ready for force field work, eh? You will hear phrases from these men such as, quote, caught in the flow, or the push, or, quote, stuck in the green, end quote, or, quote, stuck in molasses, end quote, or, quote, I was going fast, end quote. There's a lot of quotes within quotes within quotes here, by the way. That's part of the structure that this letter was written in, according to the editor here. These refer to some of the decade-later after effects of force field work. Quote, caught in the flow, end quote, describes exactly the, quote, stuck in molasses, end quote, sensation of a man going into a deep freeze or plain freeze, either of the two. Caught in the push can either refer to that which a man feels briefly when he is either about to inadvertently, quote, go blank, end quote, i.e. become invisible, or about to get stuck in a deep freeze or plain freeze. And plain spelled Plain. There are only a few of the original experimental DE's crew left by now, sir. Most went insane. One just walked through his quarters wall in sight of his wife and child and 2 other crew members, in parentheses and all caps, was never seen again, end parentheses. 2, quote, went into, quote, the flame, end quote, i.e., they, quote, froze, end quote, and caught fire while carrying common small boat compasses. One man carried the compass and caught fire. The other came for the, quote, laying on of hands, end quote, as he was the nearest, but he too took fire. All caps, they burned for 18 days. The faith in, quote, hand-laying, end quote, died when this happened, and men's minds went by the scores. And in italics, the experiment was a complete success. The men were complete failures. Check Philadelphia papers for a tiny one paragraph, in parentheses, upper half of sheet inside the paper near the rear third of the paper, 1944 to 1946. In spring or fall or winter, not summer, end parentheses. Of an item describing the sailor's actions after their initial voyage. They raided a local to the Navy Yard, quote, gin mill, end quote, or, quote, beer joint, end quote, and caused such shock and paralysis of the waitresses that little comprehensible could be gotten from them, save that paragraph, and the writer of it does not believe it, and says, quote, I only wrote what I heard, and them dames is daffy. So all I get is, quote, hide it, end quote, bedtime story, end quote. There's a lot of quotes that start and don't finish and get double quoted at the end of it. I'm trying my best to not chop it up, but I feel it's important for me to share when it's a quote and when it's not. One more paragraph, and then I'll take a break because there's two letters here. I will read the next paragraph and then I'll check the comments here. Check observer ship's crew. Matson Lines Liberty ship out of Norfolk. Parentheses, company may have ship's log for that voyage or Coast Guard have it. End parentheses. I'm reading this word for word, by the way, so the choppy sentence structure is in this letter. And the misuse of certain words, it's written this way in this letter. The SS Andrew Fernseth, spelled F-U-R-N-S-E-T-H, Chief Mate Mousley, and parentheses, will secure captain's name later, end parentheses, and then another pair of parentheses, ship's log has crew list on it, end parentheses. One crew member, Richard Price, or, quote, Splicey, end quote, Price, may remember other names of deck crew men. In parentheses, Coast Guard has record of sailors issued, quote, papers, end quote, end parentheses. Mr. Price was 18 or 19 then, October 1943, and lives or lived at that time in his old family home in Roanoke, Virginia, a small town with a small phone book. These men were witnesses. The men of this crew, quote, Connolly of New England, and in parentheses, Boston, question mark, end parentheses, may have witnessed, but I doubt it. Another set of parentheses, the spelling may be incorrect, end parentheses, did witness this. I ask you to do this bit of research simply that you may choke upon your own tongue when you remember what you have, quote, appealed to be made law, end quote. Very disrespectfully yours, Carl M. Allen. And he sent a letter days later. But let's check the comments here. Andreas says, I get we want to advance our technology, but some aspects of it are best left alone, because then we'll just end up creating something we can't control like in the movies and games. Well, there's a risk with that with everything. And I do believe this is one prime example that we've gone further with our technology, but it created something very nightmarish for the people involved. So, like what they said in this letter here, even though it's very negative and disrespectful to the researcher, it is saying that the experiment was a success in terms of science, but it was a failure on the men involved because they didn't end up right with it. So in a way, I think all of it's a failure because you want to be able, if they're trying to experiment and discover these new ways of travel with magnetics and creating these force fields and whatnot, it's complicated. But I think it's kind of like we're rediscovering technology. All of this is already here. It's set for us to find. That's how I look at it. And it's just been suppressed over and over and over and over again over time. So thanks for that comment, Andreas. Hello, Missing Time. Good to see you here. Andreas says, wow, 18 days, why so long? You know, that actually, I don't know what to say about that. I really don't. It shocked me when I read it. They're freezing and catching fire and burning for 18 days. I would say that, like, it's not their bodies or skin that's burning. It must be whatever. I'm gonna make an assumption here, and it's just my opinion. They claim of a spherical force field around the USS Eldridge. I think the people on board also had that type of force field. That's why they were able to get stuck in the walls, because that's what they're talking about here. And that's what the freezing is also. But when they say that they caught on fire, it's almost like if they have their own, if each crew member on board has their own spherical field around them that's behaving the same way as what is occurring on the ship itself, or around the ship itself, encompassing it all. What's actually burning is the outside layer that's encapsulating each crew member aboard the ship, if that makes any sense. Almost like a gas lantern. It's just continually burning. Now, another thing is, do they feel this pain? I don't know. The many mysteries of this particular subject. Alright, so before we read this second letter here, we have two photographs. So I'll read these, here. Carlos Allende, alias Carl Allen, that's the guy who wrote this letter, is the single most important individual in the story of the Philadelphia experiment. He it was who claimed to have seen the Eldridge DE-173 disappear at sea in 1943. He also claimed to have read that it had been made to vanish from its docks in Philadelphia, materialize in the Norfolk area of Virginia, and then return to Philadelphia. A total distance of over 400 miles or 640 kilometers. Many years later, Allende recalled the experiment at sea. Quote, I watched the air all around the ship turn slightly, ever so slightly, darker than the other air. I saw, after a few minutes, a foggy green mist arise like a thin cloud. I watched as therefore the DE-173 became rapidly invisible to human eyes. So I'll show you the photograph of this guy. The Philadelphia Navy Docks, Pennsylvania, USA, where, said Allende, the Eldridge was subject of a strange scientific experiment, being teleported to Virginia and back again. And it's an overhead map of the docks. I would have preferred if they'd circled exactly where. But that's all right. So, Mr. Carl Allen, that's the guy who wrote that letter we just read. And then days later, he wrote a second letter. And we're going to read that now. Hey, Ivy, good to see you here. So this is from, it says it's titled Days Later. Notes in addition to and pertaining to missive. In parentheses, contact Rear Admiral Ransom Bennett for verification of info herein. Navy Chief of Research. He may offer you a job ultimately. End parentheses. Coldly and analytically speaking, without the howling that is in the letter to you accompanying this, I will say the following in all fairness to you and to science. 1. The Navy did not know that these men could become invisible, and then all caps, while not upon the ship and under the field's influence, end caps. 2. The Navy did not know that there would be men die from the odd effects of hyper, quote, field, end quote, within or upon, quote, field, end quote. This broken English here is verbatim in here based off of how the editor wanted to keep everything intact from the handwritten letter. And I'm reading the typed text version that's in this book. So there's words used that shouldn't be. There's some that need to have a few letters cut off and stuff. It's just not fully punctual. So just keep that in mind. Number 3. Further, they even yet do not know why this happened and are not even sure that the, quote, F, end quote, within F is the reason for sure at all. In short, the atomic bomb didn't kill the experimenters. Thus, the experiments went on. But eventually, one or two were accidentally killed, but the cause was known as to why they died. Myself, I, quote, feel, end quote, that something pertaining to the small boat compass triggered off, quote, the flames, end quote. And that's not the first time he mentioned that he believes the compass is what made the flames present here. I have no proof, but neither does the Navy. Number 4. Worse and not mentioned, when one or two of their men visible within the field to all the others just walked into nothingness, and nothing could be felt of them. There's a lot of commas here that I'm trying to read this as legibly as possible. Either when the field was turned on or off, all caps, they were just gone. Then more fears were amassed. Number 5. Worse yet, when an apparently visible and new man just walks seemingly through the wall of his house. The surrounding area searched by all men and thoroughly scrutinized by and with and under an installed portable field developer, all caps, and nothing ever, and all caps, found of him. And then this is all italics. So many fears were by then in effect that the sum total of them all could not ever again be faced by any of those men or by the men working at and upon the experiments, and italics. I wish to mention that somehow, also, the experimental ship disappeared from its Philadelphia dock, and not only a very few minutes later appeared at its other dock in the Norfolk Newport News, Portsmouth area. Is it Portsmouth? This was distinctly and clearly identified as being that place, but the ship then again disappeared and went back to its Philadelphia dock in only a very few minutes or less. This was also noted in the newspapers, but I forget what paper I read it in or when it happened. Probably late in the experiments, may have been in 1956 after experiments were discontinued. I cannot say for sure. To the Navy, this whole thing was so impractical due to its morale-blasting effects. which were so much so that efficient operation of the ship was drastically hindered. And then after this occurrence, it was shown that even the mere operation of a ship could not be counted upon at all. In short, ignorance of this thing bred such terrors of it that on the level of attempted operations, with that knowledge was then available, it was deemed as impossible, impractical, and too horrible. I believe that had you then been working upon and with the team that was working upon this project, with yourself knowing what you now know, that, quote, the flames, end quote, would not have been so unexpected or such a terrifying mystery. Also, more than likely, I must say, in all fairness, none of these other occurrences could have happened without some knowledge of their possibility of occurring. In fact, they may have been prevented by a far more cautious program and by a much more cautiously careful selection of personnel for ships, officers, and crew. Such was not the case. The Navy used whatever human material was at hand, without much, if any, thought to as character and personality of that material. If great care is taken in selection of ship and officers and crew, and if careful indoctrination is taken along with careful watch over articles of apparel such as rings and watches and identification bracelets and belt buckles, plus and especially the effect of hobnailed shoes or cleated shoes, U.S. Navy issues shoes, I feel that some progress towards dissipating the fear-filled ignorance surrounding this project will most surely and certainly accomplished. Again, there's broken English in this, so this is the best I could read it for you. The records of the U.S. Maritime Service House, Norfolk, Virginia, in parentheses, for graduated seamen of their schools, end parentheses, will reveal who was assigned to SS Andrew Feruseth for month of either late September or October of 1943. I remember positively of one other observer who stood beside me when tests were going on. He was from New England. Brown, blonde, curly hair, blue eyes. Don't remember name. I leave it up to you to decide if further work shall be put into this or not, and write this in hopes there will be. Very sincerely, Carl M. Allen. So that's quite a different tone that he took with that second letter here. So here was a mysterious correspondence from a man who talked like he knew intimately about levitation, disappearing ships, and invisible men. He wrote in different color inks and with a style of writing that would not win any good grades anywhere. Jessup, meanwhile, was being pushed around by his agents in New York to run the publicity circuit and to get a new book out while the interest was still hot on his last one. But all he wanted was to make some cash and then get back to those craters in Mexico. It would have been easy to just forget the whole Allende matter, or Carl Allen. So, yeah. But Jessup sent him a postcard asking for more details, and 5 months later, he received the following reply. And in parentheses, once again, this is reprinted as it was received by Jessup. End parentheses. And before we read that, there's more photographs here. So from the left, the SS Andrew Feruseth, which Carlos Allende, using the name Carl Allen, joined in August 1943. In the photograph of the ship's officers and crew, the man standing immediately to the left of the right-hand ventilator is thought by some researchers to be Allende, or Carl Allen, who served on the ship until January 1944. Maybe to the left of the right-hand ventilator. Alright. Let's show this here. So there's a crew photo. It's not of the Eldridge. But I mean, either they're talking about here. Could that be Carl Allen? No idea. Or could that be? There's a lot of different people in this. And then there's the first in there. All right. And one more overhead map here. It says, A, the theoretical transfer position of the experimental ship when projected from the Penn's landing area. The position would be further to the west if projected from the point adjacent to the Philadelphia College of Science. So let me locate this A. So we have this map here. The ship just appeared in this general area. In Norfolk, Virginia. 400 miles from where it was sitting in port in Philadelphia. Okay? So this is where it ended up. Just for several minutes, though, and then it went back. Crazy stuff, right? But we don't call that crazy. This is science, right? Science. Okay, so Jessup asked for more details, and Carl Allen wrote back to him in a third letter, and we are about to read that here, which it goes on for nearly 3 full pages. So, just give me a moment here. Okay, and we've hit the hour mark. So we gotta... I hope I can keep this within 2 hours. It might go a little over that. Just giving you a heads up. All right, let's read this third letter from Carl M. Allen, or Allende. When there's all capital letters, I will say so. It might make everything very choppy, but I'm going to try to translate this as best as possible for you guys. I'm reading this word for word, but I'll try to capture the energy here. Dear Mr. Jessup, having just recently gotten home from my long travels around the country, I find that you had dropped me a card. You ask that I write you, quote, at once, end quote. And so after taking everything into consideration, I have decided to do so. You ask me for what is tantamount to positive proof of something that only the duplication of those devices that produced, quote, this phenomenon, end quote, could ever give you. At least, were I of scientific bent, I presume that were I of such a curiosity about something, the which has been produced from a theory that was discarded, 1927, as incomplete, I am sure that I would be of such dubiousness towards that I would have to be shown those devices that produced such a curious interaction of forces and fields in operation and their product. Mr. Jessup, I could, all caps, never, end all caps, possibly satisfy such an attitude. The reason being that I could not, nor ever would the Navy Research Department, in parentheses, then under the present boss of the Navy, Burke, end parentheses, ever let it be known that any such thing was ever allowed to be done. So he's basically saying they're going to keep it quiet, right? For you see, it was because of Burke's curiosity and willingness and prompting that this experiment was enabled to be carried out. It provided a white elephant, but his attitude towards advanced and ultra-advanced types of research is just, quote, all caps, the thing. And just the word the is quoted, unquote. That put him where he is today. In parentheses, or at least to be sure it carries a great weight. End parentheses. Where the stench of such an experiment's results were the stench of such an experiment's results ever to come out, he would be crucified. However, I have noticed that through the ages, those who have had this happen to them, once the vulgar passions that caused the reaction have cooled off, all caps, and all caps, further research, all caps, openly carried on that these crucified ones achieved something akin to sainthood. You say that this, quote, is of the greatest importance, end quote. I disagree with you, Mr. Jessup. Not just wholeheartedly, and in all italics, but vehemently. However, at the same time, your ideas and your own sort of curiosity is that of mine own sort. And besides, my disagreement is based upon philosophical morality and not upon that curiosity which drives science so rapidly. I can be of some positive help to you in myself, but To do so would require a hypnotist, sodium pentothal, a tape recorder, and an excellent typist secretary in order to produce material of real value to you. As you know, one who is hypnotized cannot lie, and one who is both hypnotized, all caps, and given, quote, truth serum, end quote, as it is colloquially known, all caps, could not possibly lie at all. To boot, my memory would be, all caps, thus enabled to remember things in such great detail, things that my present consciousness cannot recall at all, or only barely and uncertainly, that it would be of far greater benefit to use hypnosis. I could thus be enabled to not only recall complete names, but also addresses and telephone numbers, and perhaps the very important Z numbers of those sailors whom I sailed with them or even came into contact with. I could too, being something of a dialectician, be able to thusly talk exactly as these witnesses talked, and imitate or illustrate their mannerisms and habits of thought. Thus your psychologists can further, all caps, in advance, the surefire method of dealing most successfully with these. I could, all caps, not do this with someone whom I had not observed at length, and these men I lived with for about 6 months, so you are bound to get good to excellent results. The mind does, all caps, not ever forget. Not really, as you know. Upon this, I suggest this way of doing this with myself, but further, the later usage of myself in mannerisms and thought pattern illustration is suggested in order that the goal of inducing these men to place themselves at and under your disposal, in parentheses, all caps, hypnotically or under truth serum, and parentheses, is a goal which could have far greater impact due to correlation of experiences remembered hypnotically by men who have not seen or even written to each other at all for nearly over 10 years. In this, with such men as witnesses giving irrefutable testimony, it is my belief that were not the Navy but the Air Force confronted with such evidence, in parentheses, i.e. Chief of Research, there would be either an uproar or a quiet and determined effort to achieve, all caps, safely, caps, that which, or quote, that which, end quote, the Navy failed at. They did, all caps, not fail to, I hope you realize, achieve metallic and organic invisibility. Nor did they fail to, unbesottedly, achieve transportation of thousands of tons of metal and humans at an eye's blink speed. Even though this latter effect of prolonged experimentation was, in parentheses, to them, end parentheses, the thing that caused them to further experiment, the thing that caused them to consider the experiment as a failure, all caps, I believe that further experiments would naturally have produced, and this is bold all caps, controlled transport of great tonnages at ultra-fast speeds to a desired point in the instant it is desired, end all caps, through usage of an area covered by 1. Those cargoes, and 2. That, quote, field, end quote, that could cause these goods, ships, or ship parts, parentheses, all caps, men were transported as well, end parentheses, to go to another point, accidentally, and to the embarrassed perplexity of the Navy, all caps, this has already happened to a whole ship, crew, and all, end caps. I read of this, all caps, and of the off-base AWOL activities of the, end all caps, crewmen who were at the time invisible in the Philadelphia newspaper. All caps, under hypnosis, I can be enabled to divulge the name, date, and section and page number, and all caps, of that paper and the other one. Thus, the paper's, quote, morgue, end quote, will divulge, all caps, even more positive proof already published, end all caps, of this experiment. The name of the reporter who skeptically covered and wrote of these incidents, in parentheses, all caps, of the restaurant barroom raid while invisible, and of the ship's sudden AWOL, and parentheses, caps continue, and who interviewed, end caps, the waitresses, all caps, can this be found, end caps, thus, all caps, his, end caps, and the waitress's testimony can be added to the records. Once on this track, I believe that you can uncover, all caps, considerably more, end caps, evidence to sustain this. Parentheses, what would you call it? All caps, scandal? Or all caps, discovery? End parentheses. You would need a Dale Carnegie to maneuver these folks into doing just as you wish. It would be cheaper than paying everyone of all these witnesses, and much more ethical. The idea is, to the layman type of person, utterly ridiculous. However, can you remember, all by yourself, the date of a newspaper in which you saw an interesting item more than 5 years ago? Or recall names of men, their phone numbers that you saw in 1943 to 1944? I do hope you will consider this plan. You will progress as not possible in any other way. Of course, I realize that you will need a man who can cause people to want to have fun, to play with hypnotism, one that can thusly dupe those you need to. It's he-you. The 2 words. Okay, with hypnotism that can thusly dupe those you need to. Number 1, come to his demonstrations and thus call on them to be either both, quote, honored, end quote, as helping with the show and doing him a great favor, and or being part of the act for the mite of a small fee. He would, all caps, have to be a man of such an adroit ingenuity at manufacturing and then I guess this was written one line, all italics. Plausible story on, and italics. The instant, and then this is all hyphenated. The instant he sizes up his, quote, personality to be dealt with, all caps, that had cost, all caps, plenty. The ability to convince people of an outright lie as being the absolute truth would be one of his prime prerequisites. And then parentheses, ahem, A-H-E-M, period, and parentheses. Yes, some such skullduggery would have to be thought out well and done. All caps. The ultimate end will be a truth too huge, too fantastic to not be told, a well-founded truth backed up by unobfuscated proof. Positive. I'll reread that. It's all caps. The ultimate end will be a truth too huge, too fantastic to not be told, a well-founded truth backed up by unobfuscated proof. Positive. End caps. I would like to find where it is that these sailors live, all caps, now. End caps. It is known that some few people can somehow tell you a man's name and his home address, all caps, under hypnosis, even though never having met or seen the person, end caps. These folks have a very high or just a high PSI factor in their makeup that can be intensified under stress or strain, or that is usually intensified under extreme fright. It can also be re-intensified by hypnosis. Thus, it is like reading from the Encyclopedia Britannica. Even though that barroom restaurant raid was staged by invisible or partly invisible men, those men, all caps, can see each other, thus names, end caps, in the excitement, were sure to have been mentioned, whether last or first names or nicknames. I'm going to pause here. This means that the bar raid by these crew members that were on the ship that teleported 400 miles from shore to shore from Philadelphia to Norfolk. These are the same the same crew that went into the bar after the ship went from Norfolk back to Philadelphia within minutes. They were still under this invisible force field, and they all saw each other, and they all went to a bar together and caused a ruckus. To the people running the bar, they either saw nothing, so it looked like poltergeist activity, or they saw partly materialized people in there, which is wild. And I don't think I heard this part of this story. It might be in the movie, but I watched that movie many years ago, and I have it on DVD too, like just for safekeeping. But that movie did a good job showing these physical changes that happened on the ship as it transported. The walls became like liquid, and the crew got stuck in the middle of the walls. So when it did return back, they were like sealed in the wall, half of their body sticking out, probably dead. But we don't know what happened. We don't understand the half of all of this, but this is what's reported. And this is so the new piece of information we're getting out of this portion is that this experiment was successful in terms of moving the ship, but it was a failure in terms of preserving the human crew that was on board, because a lot of them lost their minds. A lot of them came back and weren't fully solid and went to the bar. Like, they couldn't be visibly seen. Like, this is wild stuff. That bar scene sounds like something out of the beginning of some horror movie, really. Missing Time says that it'd be so crazy. Yeah. Let's finish this letter here. But I wanted to just get that out of the way. That the whole barroom brawl thing with these invisible crewmates after the experiment happened. That's a story for sure. Whether you want to believe it or not, I mean, we're taking this all at face value. We're under the assumption here that this is legitimate. All right, let's finish this letter here. A check of the naval yards, dispensaries, or hospital, or aid stations, or prison, all caps, records of that particular day that the barroom restaurant occurred may reveal the, all caps, exact names of precisely who were the men, their service serial numbers, and thus the information on where they are from be secured, end caps, and by the android, quote, maneuverings, end quote, of those still at home. All caps, the name of the place, end caps, where they are at present can be secured. So Carl Allen is saying here in this letter that he knows exactly that he can find where these people are, the ones that are still surviving. I need to look up this one word. Anytime reading books, there's new words that pop up. It's not going to give it to me here, and this is it. No. See, this is another problem with today's internet. You type something into the search bar, and it's like, oh no, you mean you're looking for Android? No, Android with a T. We're trying to figure out what this means. Android, define, please. It's not going to give us it. It's all good. We're going to continue on here. I just wanted to understand what that was. All right. 2 more paragraphs in this letter. Oh, man. All right, let's just keep going. All caps. How would you like to actually speak to, in parentheses, or some of, all caps, the men, and parentheses, still all caps, a man who was once an invisible human being. And then parentheses, all caps, may become so in front of your very eyes if he turns off his hip dash set, end caps, and parentheses. Well, all this fantastically preposterous sort of rubbish will be necessary. Just to do that, the hypnotist, psychologist, and all that. Maybe I suggest something too thorough and too methodical for your taste, but then I, as first subject, don't care to be hypnotized at all, but too feel that certain pull of curiosity about this thing that to me is irresistible. I want to crack this thing wide open. Many reasons are simply to enable more work to be done upon this, quote, field theory, end quote. I am a stargazer, Mr. Jessup. I make no bones about this. And the fact that I feel that, all caps, if handled properly, i.e. presented to people and science in the proper psychologically effective manner, end caps, I feel sure that man will go where he now dreams of being, to the stars via the form of transport that the Navy accidentally stumbled upon, in parentheses, to their embarrassment, end parentheses, when their, all caps, experienced ship, end caps, took off and popped up a minute or so later on several hundred sea travel trip miles away at another of its berths in Chesapeake Bay area. I read of this in another newspaper, and only by hypnosis could any man remember all the details of which paper, date of occurrence, and etc. You see? So he put like EH. That's what he's saying in this. Perhaps already the Navy has used this incident of transport to build your UFOs. It is a logical advance from any standpoint. What do you think? And that's the end of that letter, and it's not signed, surprisingly. Well, let's do a little role play here. Pretend we're Mr. Jessup. We just got this letter from Alan. What do we think? There's that green... I don't know why that picture's like that now. It's like corrupt media right there. That's why I do double backups of everything, because sometimes that happens to media. So, anybody wanting to archive stuff, remember, all digital is corruptible. Randomly, it'll happen. That's why you have 2 copies of everything. Just copy over the good file onto the second drive again and all that. But what are my thoughts on this? What do I think? I'm in Mr. Jessup's shoes. I wrote a few books about this topic and UFOs. Did the Navy use the results of this experiment to develop UFOs? This was in 1943. I'd say there's something to it. 43, they were also doing it on the other side of the world, weren't they? And they were down at Antarctica, too. Which is off limits by basically everyone. Like, no one's allowed down there. I think the people could accept this if there was an explanation behind it. But part of explaining the technology is that the technology can be misused. So that's the standoff that we're at in present day. 75 years after the fact. At least from this writing, this portion of the book we're reading today. Let's see, let's check the comments here. I apologize about that. Andreas says, guess the space-time continuum is more complex than we will ever know, and even the slightest change to the human body could cause us to go crazy or worse. Yeah. Missing Time says, Captain, there's an arm sticking out of the bulkhead. You know, that There's a shot in that movie that really hit home with that. I'd love to just show it on display here real quick. Let me pull it up. Just bear with me here. I should be able to. Okay. This is a good one here. So what I'm going to do, we're going to watch 2 minutes of this. All right, let me get this up here. Hopefully I got it. Okay. I have it ready. I'm just moving things around here. We're going to put it right by the slideshow. Okay. So again, this is a movie that I think you can find it fairly easily. I don't use any streaming services, so I don't know where this is available, but you can find it on DVD. I know that much. So let's just watch this scene here. Yeah, we won't play too much of it because I'm trying not to get hit with the copyright stuff. So I believe this is around the time of everything happening on that ship, and like they're freaking out. Okay, so I guess the ship's vanished at this point. And then it goes to show what's on the inside, what's happening inside the ship. So there's a fire. I'd say there'd be some electric interference like that. And some of this could be taken as creative freedom of movies, but like they're portraying what's written in these descriptions here. I don't know if they jumped off the boat or not. I don't know about that. And then there it's appearing in Norfolk. They did a good job of showing a bubble. And so they also see this ship just appear. So there's a lot of witnesses of this, right? I'd assume. And then there's the limbs stuck inside of... There you go. There you go, missing time. Person's face and arm. And then here you got this guy's like burned into the ship, half in there. Look at that. Devastating. Brutal stuff. Look at that. And then a tugboat's coming up. Navy. They're scoping this thing out like, what? Why did this just show up here? And they don't even know about the crewmates that are like stuck inside the walls like that. Wild stuff. And they're still watching for wherever it was. So there's that. It's worth checking out the whole movie. I just wanted to show certain portions of that. The one shot that I wanted to show was just... it wasn't there. It showed something much worse on the, like the deck. So sorry about that. Showing the charred remains of people. I'll try to put a warning on this one when I re-upload it. All right, let's get into the rest of reading this here. One could conclude from the beginning of the letter that Jessup had asked for some specific, hard, cold facts. He could even have been looking for the actual equipment design. What he got back was as an answer was, quote, "I can't give you those things, but how about truth serum and hypnosis?" End quote. Allen's answer was too fantastic to believe, and since he provided no new information, Jessup disregarded these letters as ramblings from a crazy person with a fondness for UFOs. There wasn't anything else to do. Jessup was too busy raising capital to return to Mexico and resume his grand passion, those mysterious craters, than to pursue some crackpot talking about invisible ships and men. However, there were events happening elsewhere that would soon bring this fantastic story into Jessup's life. In late July or early August, a copy of The Case for the UFO arrived at the Office of Naval Research, or the ONR. However, this was not an ordinary copy. It had been sent to Admiral N. Firth as a manila envelope, and across the front of it had been scribbled, quote, "Happy Easter," end quote. The book itself was well worn and contained handwritten comments at the top, bottom, and margins of the pages. The comments were written in 3 different colors of ink, as if the book had been passed back and forth between 3 people. The comments suggested a knowledge of UFOs. They mentioned their method of propulsion and the origin and background of the beings operating them. The book at that time fell into the possession of Major Darrell L. Ritter, in parentheses, USMC Aeronautical Project Officer at ONR, end parentheses, who took a great interest in these comments. It was obvious that a great deal of time and effort had been put into this book. Major Ritter was also aware of the government's momentary interest in anti-gravity research, and felt that the comments about undersea cities built by 2 groups of extraterrestrials, in parentheses, called the LMs and SMs, end parentheses, were quite intriguing. These were explanations for a mysterious ship and plane disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle, which we'll be continuing on Thursday. Also included was an extensive commentary on the origins of odd storms and clouds, of objects falling from the sky, of strange marks and footprints that Jessup had written about, and many odd words, such as mothership, homeship, dead ship, great ark, great bombardment, great return, great war, little men, force fields, deep freeze, measure markers, scout ships, magnetic fields, gravity fields, sheets of diamonds, cosmic rays, force cutters, inlay work, clear talk, telepathing, nodes, vortices, and magnetic net, end parentheses, that were used throughout the book and which might be of some value for later research. Afterwards, Major Ritter passed the book on to 2 other ONR officers, Commander George W. Hoover, in parentheses, Special Projects Officer, end parentheses, and Captain Sidney Sherby. These men were intimately involved in the Navy's Project Vanguard, code name for the U.S. effort to develop the first artificial Earth satellite. Commander Hoover and Captain Sherby, reviewing the book and the mysterious comments within it, invited Jessup to come to ONR and discuss his book. By this time, it was the spring of 1957, and 18 months had passed since the book had first arrived at the ONR. As Jessup read the annotated book, he reportedly became more and more distressed because the comments referred to subjects he had heard about, but which had not been mentioned in his writings. The person or persons who had written these comments had a good understanding of the current, quote, myths, end quote, of UFOs, extraterrestrials, and other objects, mainly the concern of psychics, cultists, and mystics. Jessup became confused as to why the United States government was so interested in the scribblings from such an apparently cluttered mind. As he read further, he came across a comment concerning a secret Navy experiment in 1943, and immediately he knew who had been responsible for the crazed and disjointed comments. Jessup then shared his discovery with the naval officers, and they in turn asked if the ONR could have the letters. They then informed Jessup that a special edition of his book was being produced by them, and it would include all the editions. Jessup consented to the new edition and made 3 additional trips to the ONR concerning this matter. Shortly after these meetings, Jessup was involved in a car accident. At the same time, he began experiencing marital difficulties. Close friends say he was never quite the same after that. He seemed quite disturbed by the Navy experience, and after receiving the promised copies of his own book, he spent considerable time adding his own comments. Hoover and Shelby would, in the days to come, make many attempts to find the elusive Allende, or Carl Allen, but with no success. Jessup was still confused as to why the Navy was so interested in this matter, and he spent considerable time researching the details of the operation known as the, quote, Philadelphia experiment. In the meantime, all his efforts to get back to Mexico had come up blank, and he now devoted himself to writing and publishing. He moved back to his native Indiana and started publishing a small astrological journal. During October of 1958, Jessup left Indiana for New York on publishing business, and around the 31st, paid a visit to a friend, Ivan T. Sanderson. And by the way, he comes up a lot with the Bermuda Triangle material. Founder of the Society for the Investigation of the Unexplained, or the SITU. Over dinner, Jessup gave Sanderson the copy of the book he had been making notes in. Jessup, being visibly disturbed, asked Sanderson in great sincerity to read it and then lock it up for safekeeping. Quote, in case anything should happen to me, end quote. Jessup was scheduled to return to Indiana within a few days. When he failed to return, his publisher became concerned and contacted one of Jessup's associates concerning his whereabouts. His associate related that he had no information. 6 weeks after his New York departure, Jessup was located in Florida. Apparently, he had gone there from New York and had been involved in another major car accident from which he was still recovering. Jessup, during those next months, was in terrible spirits. His publisher rejected his manuscripts as, quote, not up to par, end quote. His writings were drawing considerable criticism from all around the country. On April 20th, 1959, 2 years after meeting with the ONR, Jessup was found dead in his car, close to his Florida home. A victim of carbon monoxide poisoning. A hose had been attached to his car exhaust and passed into the passenger side window. Jessup had killed himself. Or had he? Jessup's death has been the subject of substantial speculation. Some of his friends have said that Jessup was not the type to kill himself. Others have suggested he was murdered when he refused to abandon his UFO research. Rumors were then circulating about the, quote, Men in Black, end quote. The name given to government agents who allegedly visited several UFO researchers and, quote, persuaded, end quote, them to cease and desist their work. Other friends said that Jessup was depressed about personal problems and that he had sent a suicide note to a close friend. However, the handwriting was not checked to see if it matched with Jessup's. The truth about Morris K. Jessup will probably never be known. Oh, shame. Placing him in that same file cabinet along with Karen Silkwood. That's a new name. Karen Silkwood, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and other humans regarding whom certain factions in our society would have an easier time of things if they were invisible or dead. So we might ask, did the Navy really make a destroyer-class ship disappear and transport itself over 400 miles of ocean in a matter of moments? Or is this just some fantastic story? And if this is not just a story, why did they do it? We know by the results why the Navy might have wanted to keep things quiet. Governmental cover-ups are not new. They seem to come with the institution. Maybe we can reach a conclusion more easily if we learn more about the last day of Jessup's life. Dr. J. Manson Valentine, an oceanographer, archaeologist, and zoologist, had been a friend of Jessup's for the last 14 years of his life while he resided in Florida. Jessup, as we know, was very upset during the last months of his life and was reaching out more than ever to talk with someone. Dr. Valentine was that someone. It was during these last months that Jessup shared his innermost feelings about the Philadelphia experiment with him. It's very probable that Dr. Valentine was the last person to talk with Jessup. He had spoken to Jessup on April 20th, 1959, and had invited Jessup to dinner. Jessup accepted his invitation but never showed up. When asked, quote, why do you think Jessup killed himself, end quote, Dr. Valentine's answer was, quote, if he committed suicide, it was probably due to extreme depression. He had been approached by the Navy to continue working on the Philadelphia experiment or similar projects, but had declined, as he was worried about its dangerous ramifications. Perhaps he could have been saved. He was still alive when he was found. perhaps he was allowed to die, end quote. Like the medics just didn't resuscitate. Dr. Valentine went on to say that Jessup had researched the question of the Philadelphia experiment, quote, pretty thoroughly. You must remember that he was not a crank writer, but a distinguished and famous scientist, end quote. Dr. Valentine remembers Jessup relating some strange things he had learned concerning the Navy's experiment. Jessup said the invisibility effect had been accomplished by using magnetic field generators called degaussers. So that's spelled Degausssers, which were, quote, pulsed, end quote, at resonant frequencies to create a huge magnetic field around the destroyer. In Dr. Valentine's opinion, Jessup was well informed of the alleged experiment and had met with the Navy officers and scientists several times. He had said to Dr. Valentine, quote, the experiment is very interesting but awfully dangerous. It is too hard on the people involved. This use of magnetic resonance is tantamount to temporary obliteration in our dimension. But it tends to get out of control. Actually, it is equivalent to a transference of matter into another level or dimension, and could represent a dimensional breakthrough if it were possible to control it, end quote. According to Valentine, Jessup believed he was, quote, on the verge of discovering the scientific basis for whatever was happening, end quote. Jessup explained, quote, an electric field created in a coil induces a magnetic field at right angles to the first, and each of these fields represents one plane of space. But since there are 3 planes of space, there must be a third field, perhaps a gravitational one. By hooking up electromagnetic generators so as to produce a magnetic pulse, it might be possible to produce this third field through the principle of resonance, end quote. Jessup thought the Navy had discovered this by accident. We're going past 2 hours. I apologize for that. There's like 8 pages left, roughly. This brings up the interesting possibility of a 4th dimension. It is known by abstract mathematics that it is possible to have as many as 15 dimensions. 15 dimensions. If they exist as a mathematical concept, they exist in fact, and in parentheses, according to Pythagoras, end parentheses. It is a widely held belief among scientists that a basic atomic structure is essentially electric in nature rather than material. A vast interplay of energies is involved. This concept gives us great flexibility in visualizing the universe such that if multiple phases of matter don't exist, it would be quite surprising. The transition from one phase, in parentheses, our world, end parentheses, to another world, would be equivalent to the passage from one plane of existence to another in a sort of interdimensional metamorphosis. It is a case of worlds within worlds. That's what I'm starting to come to the conclusion to. Magnetism is thought to be the key factor in the control of these dimensional changes. Magnetism is the only phenomenon for which scientists have no mechanical explanation. We can visualize electrons traveling along a wire to create electric current, and we can envision waves of different frequencies to create heat, light, and radio. But a magnetic field defies mechanical interpretation. In addition, when UFOs do their materializations, dematerializations, intense magnetic disturbances are always present. With these thoughts in mind, let's see how the concept of a, quote, world grid, end quote, would be a key factor in the location and function of the alleged Philadelphia experiment. This would imply foreknowledge of the world grid by the Navy and using it for this exact experiment. Similar to the nuclear bomb. The Philadelphia experiment is fantastic because it disturbs our sense of what we think exists in a particular time and space. When we speak of space and time, we invariably think of Einstein. Jessup believed Einstein's theories held the key to UFO propulsion. After all, Carl Allen had confirmed that it not only was the key, but full-scale research and experimentation of Einstein's mysterious mathematical concepts was already a reality. Researching naval employment records, we find that Albert Einstein was hired as a scientist for the Office of Naval Research on May 31st, 1943, a post he maintained until June 30th, 1944. Also, on July 24th, 1943, Einstein met with naval officers in his Princeton study, just 3 months prior to the Philadelphia experiment. One way to cross the tremendous distances of space would be to alter the structure of space itself. This could be accomplished by modifying the space-time geometric matrix. It is this matrix that gives us the illusion of form and distance. One method of changing the matrix is through the modification of frequencies controlling the matter-antimatter cycles. These, in turn, control our perceptions of things existing in apparent space-time. Einstein's premise is that time is a geometric concept. Therefore, if this could be altered, then all of the universe would become available to us at any single moment. That sounds a lot like time travel to me. In 1 second, we could travel great distances, for at that point, distance would be revealed as an illusion. According to a prevalent view, time is the factor that keeps objects apart in space. With the possibility of moving from place to place in what is called, quote, zero time, end quote, then both places exist in the same place according to our perception. By speeding up the geometric of time, we are able to bring distant objects closer together. This is the secret of extraterrestrial spacecraft. They travel by altering the space dimension and bringing time to zero. Einstein believed that physical matter was nothing more than a concentrated field of force. What we see visually as a physical substance is in actuality a combination, in parentheses, or four-dimensional matrix, end parentheses, of frequencies. Different frequencies combine in different ways, thus creating different physical masses. These masses seem solid to us because we are also made up of similar waveforms which vibrate within a defined bandwidth. And this bandwidth makes up the limited perspective of our visual physical world. And I want to just mention the word bandwidth is hyphenated, so band hyphen width. The word today is unhyphenated, and the internet computer realm here. So, in the famous equation of E equals mc squared, m for the value of mass can be replaced by a value representing a specific waveform. According to Bruce Cathy's Mathematics of the World Grid, the substituted term is a function of the velocity of light. Einstein and his equation E equals mc squared. The Cathy grid, the equation m equals c plus the square root of 1/c. Not sure how that... It's like 1/2 of... I don't know. You can input a number into the c variable, I guess. Therefore, E equals... I'm just going to show it. It's a harmonic equation 1. We also have another map here. Let's read that and show that before we move on. Position A, theoretical experimental site in the vicinity of the Philadelphia College of Science. Position B, theoretical experiment site in the vicinity of Penn's Landing. Latitude A through B equals 143,795.77 seconds of arc north, the speed of light harmonic at the Earth's surface. So Philadelphia and the vicinity, and then A and B. The distance matches the harmonic of light. Within this unified field equation, expressed in terms of pure electromagnetic energy, lies the key to the universe, the whole of existence, the seen and unseen, forms, solids, liquids, and gases, the stars and the blackness of space itself. All is perceived to consist of visible and invisible waves of light. All of creation is light. The Earth is simply a huge magnet wound with magnetic lines of force. The coils are 1,725 centimeters squared in one direction and 1,850 centimeters squared in the other. These lines of force form a grid pattern due to the spin of our planet. At any given point, there are 1 trillion lines of force crossing and creating small vortices. I really wonder if the reason why we don't have like the code cracked here yet is because of these variables of the spinning and the globe. I don't know if that's what's causing this disconnect here with implementing any of this stuff. You know? I can't give a solid answer to that. This is a discussion of like substituting variables. So instead of accounting for like spin, like you have to have that be, if the equation works, that's one thing. But if they're just kind of saying, oh, maybe that's what, if they're just speculating, then it's not a proper answer. At any given point, there are 1 trillion lines of force crossing and creating small vortices. Each vortex manifests as an atomic structure and creates within itself a gravitational field. And from what we read last week, it was saying that every, like, all the ley lines and everything, the magnetics, they're lined up as close as possible, and they're like the size of a piece of human hair. And they're all lined up. Like, that's how minute and small all of those lines are across the entire grid. And then when they all match up and have higher frequencies, that's when you have the bigger lines, which are expressed on the larger maps. And they do like two sides of showing like different circles and everything. Like it shows North America here. And the area of Coral Castle. And then the Philadelphia experiment somewhere up here. Right? Seems to make sense. Each vortex manifests as an atomic structure and creates within itself a gravitational field. The gravitational field is nothing more than the effect of relative motion in space. You see, it's just, they throw it away. It's a throwaway line. Matter is drawn towards a gravitational field just as a piece of wood is drawn into a whirlpool. The gravitational fields created by the vortexual action of every atom combine to form the complete field of our planet Earth. The lattice matrix of the world grid is the natural grid formed by these interlocking lines of force. In parentheses, as an editor's note, actually the magnetic field density at the surface of the Earth in Gauss, that's spelled G-A-U-S-S, is approximately 0.5 lines per centimeter squared. And that's why we say it's smaller than, or as small as a human hair. In terms of the density of the lines. And really, when we're talking about gravity, what we're really talking about, I believe, is density. The basic unit for harmonic calculation in relation to this grid is the geodetic inch, or 0.172 minutes of arc. 1 minute of arc being 6,000 geodetic feet. By taking the values of 1,725 and 1,850 per centimeter squared and calculating the field strengths for 1 square geodetic inch, the field density is found to be 8,326.71764 and 12,255.08864, respectively. When the fields are in opposition, the combined field density is 20,581.80628 for 1 square geodetic inch. The difference in field strengths is calculated to be 12,255.08864 minus, there's a typo here, 83,26.71764, which equals 3,000. Okay, so it was 8,326.71764. The comma is in the wrong spot, which equals 3,928.371. From this, we can say that the resultant field density one way is field A minus field B, or 3,928.371 lines of force per centimeter squared. This value is reciprocal of half of the distance of the polar grid square size. We can now formulate another equation in order to demonstrate the association of the Earth's magnetic field with the speed of light. Please note that 144,000 is a speed of light harmonic value in free space. The figure of 143,900 minutes of arc grid per second will be explained below. Got a harmonic equation, but we also have two different, this is what's going to eat up time. We got two different newspaper articles So we had to read them. We got to go through all of this. So let's go. The Pantograph, Thursday, August 21st, 1986. And this was published in Bloomington-Normal, Illinois. Navy has lots of tricks to make carriers disappear. Washington, D.C., from Associated Press. U.S. Navy aircraft carriers, despite their incredible size, are becoming adept at a form of magic. Utilizing weather, speed, and advanced logistical planning, and high-tech tomfoolery, several carriers in recent months have managed to vanish from antagonists' eyes into the vastness of the oceans, reappearing only at the moment of attack. Last April, dogged by airplanes rented by American television networks and by Soviet intelligence vessels, the carriers Coral Sea and America dropped from sight off the coast of Sicily. Less than 24 hours later, their planes bombed targets in Libya. And just over a month ago, a much lengthier case of a, quote, missing, end quote, carrier occurred during an exercise named RIMPAC 86. The USS Ranger, although the target of an intense search that included satellite resonance, escaped detention for 2 weeks, or escaped detection for 2 weeks while sailing across the Pacific. The performance was considered all the more remarkable by an Australian admiral who monitored the exercise because the carrier's planes were flying sorties throughout the period, staging mock attacks against surface ships, submarines, and land targets. Rear Admiral I.W. Knox, Knox, of the Royal Australian Navy, disclosed recently the, quote, orange, end quote, forces in RIMPAC could not locate the Ranger, quote, from the time it departed Southern Californian exercise areas until it steamed into Pearl Harbor some 14 days later. End quote. Reports of such exploits delight Navy brass, who must answer critics who think carriers are sitting ducks in an age of nuclear-powered submarines and cruise missiles. Modern-day carriers have yet to be tested in combat against Soviet weaponry, but they are practicing hard at what the Navy calls, quote, maneuver strategy, end quote. If the enemy can't find you, you have surprise, and with surprise, you can win. Navy spokesman declined to discuss the warfighting tactics, citing military secrecy, but several officers interviewed recently who asked not to be identified say the idea of a, quote, stealthy carrier, end quote, is not so far-fetched. Consider the Coral Sea and the America accomplished their feats through a variety of tricks, but the most important were, quote, masking, end quote, and, quote, MCON. It's all caps, or EMCON. It's an acronym for something. End quote. The details of masking are classified, but essentially it involves making another ship, a destroyer for example, look and sound like a carrier, and a carrier look like something else. And it says, please see carriers, page A5, and that is what's directly on the next page. So the process normally begins when a carrier is under radar surveillance but beyond visual sight. The decoy ship maintains the carrier's previous course while the carrier speeds away. Quote, "We can make the Soviets believe another ship is the carrier," end quote, says one official. Quote, "The radar image, broadcasting pilot talk, and the radio sounds of flight operations, the lighting at night, it looks like a duck and sounds like a duck, so it must be a duck. So they follow the duck and make a mistake," end quote. The carrier, meantime, can employ lighting at night as it makes it look like a tanker. Also employed by the Coral Sea and America, and key to the Rangers' disappearing act, was MCON. This is the equivalent of a submarine, quote, "rigging for silence," end quote, or a convoy traveling under blackout conditions. MCON is a Navy acronym for Emission Control. Emission, in this case, refers to the electric... This is why I only do 2 hours here. But we're going to go through it. All right. MCON is a Navy acronym for emission control. Emission, in this case, refers to signals that are radiated by such equipment as radars, sonar, and radio. When the carrier goes to MCON, it literally shuts down much of its electronic gear to avoid detection. Navy officials say a carrier can operate for long periods in MCON because, quote, "we go mute but not deaf or blind," end quote. The procedure works by utilizing E-2-C Hawkeye radar planes flying at some distance from the carrier. Everything the Hawkeye sees is relayed electronically to the carrier and its escorts, providing a picture of aerial activity as well as surface forces. While transmitting, the Hawkeye is far from the carrier, which gets the plane's sign. Or gets the plane's signals. The scan of the newspaper is missing letters here. While transmitting, the Hawkeye is far from the carrier, which gets the plane's signals passively without any transmission of its own. The Hawkeye also takes on the role of air traffic controller for the carrier's planes. Replenishment oilers, meantime, are told well in advance to make their own way to a specific position in the ocean. Again, radio silence is maintained. Aviation tactics: even if radar can't pick up a carrier sailing beyond the horizon, the ship's location can be betrayed by a jet aircraft scrambling into the air. The Navy's answer is called, quote, "offset vector," end quote. Quote, "to be simplistic, the planes don't climb," end quote, says one officer. Quote, "they catapult off and literally hit the deck. If planes are suddenly popping up 100 miles from the ship, you have no idea where they came from," end quote. Speed, publicity, and the Navy says its carriers... Speed. Publicly, the Navy says its carriers are capable of speeds, quote, "in excess of 30 knots," end quote. Privately, officers acknowledge the floating cities can approach 40 knots. Quote, "we can literally outrun the Soviet tattletales," in parentheses, intelligence ships, end parentheses. "And in heavy weather of any kind, there is no contest. The carrier can outrun its own escorts," end quote. Weather and satellites. Anyone who's been caught in the rain after the weatherman forecasts sunny skies has his own thoughts on meteorology, but there have been solid gains made within that science in recent years. Quote, Although really heavy weather can hurt flight operations, these guys know how to follow weather patterns and to use rainstorms and above all cloud cover, end quote, says one official. Quote, the carriers can receive weather data via satellite passively without portraying their position, end quote. Quote, and we know the orbital perimeters of Soviet reconnaissance satellites as well as our own, end quote, adds another. Quote, if there's a recon bird coming by and you can duck into some weather, you duck into the weather. Or if you know there's a blind spot in coverage, you will sail there, end quote. Quote, once you succeed in slipping away, end quote, summarizes one officer, end quote. Quote, the odds shift in your favor. Most people don't have any conception of how big the oceans are. You can be lonely if you want, end quote. So next we have the harmonic equation 2. I'm just going to show this on the screen instead of reading it out. Okay. The reduction in speed of light is equal in harmonic terms to the resonant field strength divided by the radius of the spherical mass. In this case, the radius is equivalent to the distance in minutes of arc from the Earth's center to the average height of the atmosphere, in parentheses 432 being a harmonic of 4,320 minutes of arc, end parentheses. We can now generate another equation by inserting the value for the speed of light at the Earth's surface. By mathematical conversion, this was found to be 143,795.77 minutes of arc per grid second, where 1 grid second was 1/972,000th part of the time taken for one revolution of Earth. And so here's harmonic equation 3. I'm going to show that. Then there's 2 more diagrams on the next page. All right. Theoretical geometric pattern for the Philadelphia experiment. I'm just going to show this as well. And then we have the routes of the ships here. I'll show that. So they put the distance on a grid here. Here's all that information if you want to pause it later and screenshot or read it, because I'm not going to read this right now. And then below here, so we have Bermuda. Whoa, is that really what it's showing us here? Do you see that? We have the grid down here. The Eldridge, the one that was in the Philadelphia experiment. Sailed 17th of August to New York. Then it went down to Bermuda. in September 28th through December 1943. Then back up to Block Island, 29th to 31st. Not sure what the dotted line is. This is possible location of experiment. 2/12 November in Atlantic. And then the fur Seth, that's the lighter colored line there in Norfolk. But you see the distance here now. For the Eldridge, it went from Philadelphia, disappeared, and ended up in Norfolk down there. 400 miles difference. Okay. And again, if you have any questions about this, let me know in the comments. We're nearing the end of the chapter, so we're almost done here today. Thank you for hanging in there. Now let's surmise that as the harmonic of light decreases, the energy which is being released converts its form into physical matter. You wouldn't think that the universe would leave to chance the physical stuff we call reality. As Einstein once said, quote, "God does not play dice with the universe," end quote. Invisible ships, disappearing men, reality notwithstanding. Bruce Cathy has spent considerable time studying the latitudes and longitudes of the Philadelphia and Norfolk Navy Yards in a search for the 2 points that were harmonically correct for the movement across space-time. The latitude of the Philadelphia Naval Base, namely 39 degrees 56 feet 35.77 inches north. Again, I don't think I'm reading that correctly. Set up a prime harmonic of the speed of light, which was 143,795.77 seconds of arc. It is an interesting coincidence that the College of Science was established at this latitude. This latitude is equivalent to 143,795.77 seconds of arc north. The latitude in the Norfolk area is 36 degrees 55 feet 8 inch north. And I'm just going to show you those calculations here without reading them out. The direct Great Circle track between the two sites is 189.7366596 minutes of arc, which is equivalent to 3.16227766 degrees. The circular area swept out by a wave of this radius would harmonically be equal to pi. The latitude displacement is 181.452266 minutes of arc. The square root of this number equals 13.47042, which is a harmonic of the electron spacing in the atomic nucleus. The longitudinal spacing would equal 1.1803288 degrees. The reciprocal of this number is 0.8472215. When doubled, this number yields the 1.69443 harmonic. And here we have the Norfolk docks. Another visualization of the grid and the different latitudes and longitudes here. And we pretty much have one page left, so thank you for being here today. Another interesting coincidence exists here. Line B-C in the diagram is very close to and parallel with grid line number 18 on the Becker-Huygens world grid system. From the previous chapter in this book, The Planetary Grid, A New Synopsis. And this line connects the Philadelphia docks and the Norfolk docks with the Bermuda Triangle. Could it be that the vessel in its dematerialized state was actually on this grid line? Could it be that the energy that makes all of this possible is a magnetic field transmitted at the correct frequency by the powerful field generators aboard the ship? Maybe it is true that the Navy scientists didn't expect what resulted from their unique experiment. Maybe, in fact, the results were terribly counter to the desired effects. If indeed the goal had been just to make the ships invisible to radar, in parentheses similar to modern day stealth systems, end parentheses, or go to magnetically repel torpedoes, perhaps instead the Navy found something of much greater import than anyone had ever imagined. It seems to me that the experiment was just that, an experiment. We will never know what the true purpose of this experiment was. The purpose of the last experiment in the series was most likely the actual transport of the ship, a possibility the Navy might have learned through earlier tests. But originally they were looking for radar invisibility or a magnetic torpedo/mine shield. The war was going to be won on the sea, and thus the opportunistic Navy exploited Einstein's misgivings about the rise of Nazi Germany to persuade him to assist the US government in developing a passive protection device. In the process, they found incredible mysteries regarding pulsating magnetic fields, and through the course of their experimentations, literally led themselves into matter transports. Perhaps the most incredible coincidence is that the presumed matter transport apparently happened along a world grid line. I can hear it now. Quote, Philadelphia, Norfolk physical matter transport now leaving on grid line number 18 at 1400 Greenwich Mean Time. Visitors, please board the vehicle at this time. End quote. The answers to the many puzzles of the Philadelphia experiment will someday be known, or perhaps they are already known by a few. Anyway, the mystique persists. The following article appeared in the Pantograph on August 21st, 1986, published in Bloomington, Normal, Illinois. And that article, we read that article earlier. That was the one with that was this. It was a few pages before that. And in parentheses, an editor's note, the Philadelphia experiment has been a mystery for many years. We welcome the reader's comments on this subject, as do I, with you, and any new facts or speculations they might have, so that this continuing enigma can finally be solved. End parentheses. And that is it for this chapter today. There was a lot in here that I didn't know previously, so this is very information-packed, very dense. If you have to go back and rewatch this, go by all means, because that's how you absorb information. So for next week, this is the chapter we'll be reading. Ley Lines and the Meeting of Adam by Richard Leviton. Oh no, there we go. that's what we're getting into next week. So, same time as today, next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central Time. We'll continue with part 35. And you can see we're about halfway. A little past halfway. There's a lot more to all of this here. We're going to be looking more at Bruce Cathy in this. There's excellent chapters. This is a compilation of different researchers all put into one book. We're getting back to a lot of the stuff we were looking at when we started this series. Today was chapter 5. Next week's chapter 6. Chapter 7, International Harmony Based Upon a Music of Planetary Grid Systems by Barbara Hero. In 3 weeks' time, we'll be covering Acoustic Levitation of Stones by Bruce Cathy. So that's another one that brings us all back around here. There's 13 chapters total in here, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We got 2 months left of this. It's all good though. Just for this book, there's plenty more material that I'm going to be covering in this deep dive series, but that'll be it for today's installment. And I don't want to keep you guys any longer than I need to. So again, thank you all for being here. I appreciate the time that you spend here with me. And as always, remember to leave a like down below. Share your thoughts in the comments. It definitely will help. And keep a lookout for the re-uploads, because I do have to get these live shows re-uploaded again, because we are on complete blacklist at this point. No hyperbole here. There's just no explanation for the ratio of subscribers versus live viewers. So this topic is really not promoted on any of these platforms, unfortunately. But until the next one, class dismissed.